So we begin again. We're ready to start part two, and what we're going to do is we've waited for the paint to dry, and now we're going to begin applying our second coat. So now this is going to be a much lighter coat and go on. It's going to go on much smoother, much more even. You're not going to see like those little blotches or little areas of bare skin. We're just going to apply a nice even light coat so we have a nice smooth finish. And we're just going to apply that throughout the entire look. I'm just going to go ahead and do the arms, the torso, and the legs as well, and just go ahead and get a nice even look. We're now ready to apply our primary stencils. Now, our pattern stencil is basically the design you're going to shoot throughout the entire. Now, when airbrushing on the stencil, it's important, number one, never apply too much pressure to the model, because what can happen is the heat from your skin can actually warm that paint and soften it, and when you pull the stencil off, it'll actually take the paint with it. Now, when using stencils, it's important not to paint underneath the stencil. Never shoot towards the edges. Try to shoot as much as possible straight down at the stencil. And also, when you're ready to remove, be sure to pull the stencil straight off the body. What can happen is the stencil can actually smear and destroy your piece of art, and you'll actually have to go back in and re-detail the perimeters. Now you'll take notice how very little paint is needed to be applied to actually show a crisp line. Now basically in today's design I'm going for more of an artistic pastel type look, so I'm actually going for a little bit of oversprays. So my pressure is very light. Now when spraying in the breast area, it's important that you shoot your airbrush straight down at the stencil. No matter what angle you're at, if you shoot straight at the stencil, from that angle, you'll have a nice crisp line. Now, one trouble area you'll have to deal with is underneath the breast area. Underneath the breast area tends to sweat more than most areas. The paint tends to crack or sometimes even pucker underneath those areas, so it's important to use very little pressure when putting stencils in those areas. Now the next thing we're going to do are the accessories, or the stockings or the glove. These tend to be a much subtler pattern as opposed to your primary stencil. So I generally prefer something a little bit tinier, something a little bit more delicate. Now it's also important that your pattern runs straight down the entire leg. Try to find a link somewhere in your pattern that you can actually connect if your pattern isn't long enough. So this way you have a nice consistent pattern throughout the entire leg on both legs. I now go through and I'll flip that pattern so I get a duplicate on the opposite side. So this way our pattern isn't leaning one way or the other. We're now simply just going to go through and duplicate the same pattern on the left arm as we did on both the right and the left leg. Also, always try to make sure you're always shooting straight at your stencil, once again, so you get nice crisp lines. It's important to always keep that in the back of your mind. It can oftentimes be quite valuable to have an assistant available to hold stencils. Sometimes when you're body painting, you could be at particular angles, and holding stencils can be quite difficult, especially when you're alone and trying to hold the airbrush at the same time. Using acetate film, we're now going to create the illusion of seams. I simply cut 2 to 4 long strips at approximately a ½ inch apart. Now in most cases, overspray can be quite a nuisance, but when it fits. Now I'm simply going to put the seams down a consistent portion of the body. I generally will go down the left and the right arm on the inside of the arm and down the center of the chest on both sides. Now by simply placing the stencil, what I'll actually do is go through and spray directly on the stencil. So what happens is the overspray on the left and the right will be quite faint and will actually render itself to the left and to the right, saving me the hassle of blending. Now connecting the lines, I'll just simply go through and duplicate the same process straight down. We're now ready to apply the seams to the arms. I prefer putting on the inside of the arms. They're a little hidden, and I don't want to take away from my primary design. I again now just want to simply connect the lines and follow the stencil all the way down, so it looks like a nice, straight, consistent, realistic seam. Again, making sure our stencils are even on both sides, so they're on the same line as the interior of the arm. Now you see our lines are consistent and even, and consistency is often in hobby shops. I simply cut them into strips, place them over top of the areas that I had the seam stenciled. Now by simply following the seam pattern, I'll just lightly go through with a very fine mist of white, just to highlight what would appear to be stitches. And we're simply going to follow through and follow all the seam patterns. We're now ready to begin hand detailing. Hand detailing is what's going to make your patterns more visible to a camera. Now in hand detailing, there are no rules. Be an artist, be free, do whatever you want to. Now today I'm going to go through and once again try to make something a little bit more sketchy, a little bit more artistic. Always remember there are no rules. Now softening is simple. We go through and we're using white. I'm going to go through and I'm just going to lightly highlight here and there just to soften the pattern a little bit. Now by now you should be beginning to notice a softer feel to the whole body art. It's basically getting a nice soft pastel look to it. Now generally through the smaller areas, I'll just simply go in and just shoot a little spot in there just to soften the whole idea of it. We're now ready to create the illusion of realism. But we're going to begin highlighting by simply following the natural light that's reflecting off the body. It's basically like a pre-made pattern that you could simply follow. Now we begin by holding the brush approximately 6 to 12 inches away from the area you're highlighting, and it'll give the natural illusion of a highlight, even in dark areas. It's important to keep straight, crisp lines. You don't want a definite line, but you want a nice consistent line. You want a pattern all the way down the leg. You don't want to stop in between because you'll see paint spots on the way. Again, following the light's own natural pattern, I'm going to go ahead and follow that pattern all the way down in nice, smooth, consistent rows. Anytime you stop in between will show up as an inconsistency in a shadow, which will instantly let people know it's paint and not actually clothing. When I am applying a highlight and a low light, especially with working with women, I really prefer to keep a nice shapely contour. Sometimes you may be working with models who don't have a very shapely figure. You can create that shape with the paint, especially with. Once again, I'm just going to go through and follow the light's own natural pattern. We're now ready to do just the opposite. We're now going to follow all the dark areas. Anywhere there's a shadow is a natural low light. Now in painting down the center of your model, Make sure you paint all the way down. Don't lead it right to the belly button. Continue past so it still gives the appearance of clothing. If you stop there, it's going to give a point of interest, which means someplace someone's going to be noticing. And we're once again just going to follow our natural lowlights, following them down and maybe even accentuating the curve of the female's body. We're now ready to low light the outside of the quadriceps and down the side of the calves. Now outside the quadriceps tend to have a little depression that is really easy to follow, tighten up, and actually follow it while they're tightening up. Now on the inside of the quadricep, directly in the front of the leg, I tend to put a low light right down, right next to my highlight, because it helps bring a little bit of depth, almost like it has a shine to it.